Hi, this is Scott Geitler from Bluewater Photo, and today I am going to talk about a very new, exciting housing from Fantasea for the Sony A6400. Now, actually, I'm going to also talk about the housing for the Sony A6500 because it's almost the same exact housing. It's just slightly different because it fits the A6500 and this housing fits the A6400. But for all practical purposes, you can think of it as the same housing. The A6400 is the newest camera from Sony, and it replaces their A6300 model. Let's talk about Fantasea for a minute. Fantasea is probably the most well known for making housings for compact cameras like the G7X Mark II and the Sony RX100 3, 4, 5, and 6. But recently they started making housings for mirrorless cameras, specifically Sony. They have a housing for the A6000 and they had a housing for the A6300 and 6500. That housing worked for both cameras. So now what they've done is they've updated the A63-6500 housing to what's called the V2 housing, and at the same time they've come out with this housing for the A6400. Now what's really exciting about these housings is that it includes a new vacuum system that can let you know if your housing is likely to leak underwater or if it's safe to take underwater. So that's a really big change for Fantasea to include that, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. But let's talk about these Sony cameras for a minute. The Sony mirrorless cameras, they're crop sensor cameras, so they have a larger sensor than the Micro Four Thirds cameras like the Olympus EM1 Mark II or the Panasonic GH5, and it's the same size sensor as, say, a Nikon D500. But not as large as a full frame sensor like the Sony A7R3. So, but it's still quite a large sensor, and it's going to give you excellent image quality for both video and stills. So if you want a high quality mirrorless camera and you like Sony and you want to keep the setup small, both the A6400 and the A6500 are going to be great choices, and the Fantasea housing is also going to be a very nice choice, which we're going to get into in this video exactly why this is. The A6400 camera specifically, it's a 24 megapixel camera. Sony's made a lot of improvements, so the autofocus is really fast. We've been shooting with it on land, underwater, and we're just so impressed by the response of this camera. It's even noticeably faster than the A6300 and A6500 cameras. So ultra fast focus, it has a burst mode, 11 frames per second, which is really fast, but overall it's not that dramatically different from the A6300, other than those speed changes on the autofocus, which if you're shooting action underwater, you're shooting sharks or dolphins coming by, then I think it is a noticeable improvement that you want to take notice of. And I also want to point out the A6400 camera has the LCD screen can tilt 180 degrees, which is something Sony's trying to market to vloggers who want to videotape themselves and put themselves up on YouTube or Vimeo. So let's talk about the Fantasea housing. This is the Fantasea housing for the A6400. But again, the housing for the A63-6500 V2 is practically identical, except that dimensions are slightly different because those cameras are slightly different sizes. This housing is very light. I think it's the lightest A6400 housing on the market by a little bit. Very easy to hold with one hand. It's very easy to handle underwater with one hand. It's depth rated to 200 feet, has a double O-ring, very easy to open up. You can open up the housing and you see you have an O-ring here, you have an O-ring here. I really like their tray. Their tray has nice instructions, so you know exactly how to use the tray. You put the camera on the tray. You have to lift the LCD up a little bit. You put it on the tray, slide it in, and it locks. The housing closes very easily, very securely. You can hear a click. So in terms of just day-to-day operations, opening and closing the back of the housing, very easy. I definitely give it an A in that area. The buttons are very clearly labeled. You have full functionality over everything you need to do underwater photography or video. You can change the dials. You can pop up the flash. Here's the vacuum valve, which we're going to get into in a moment. And it also includes an M16 bulkhead, which means you can put in an HDMI cable for an external video monitor, or you can put an electronic sync cord in here for firing strobes if you want to use an electronic sync cord. This little shade here over the LCD screen is also very nice. So if it's sunny, if you're in shallow water, it makes it a little easier to see the LCD, reduces glare a little bit. So that's nice. The housing does have a variety of ports you can get for it. There's a dome port, there's ports for macro lenses. It supports actually a wide variety of lenses, like the Sony fisheye lens with a 16mm prime, the Zeiss 12mm, the Sony 10-18 wide angle, the 16-50. It supports the Sony 50mm macro lens, a 90mm macro lens. So a lot of lenses are supported. I don't think it supports the 16-70 f4, which some people may want to use for video, but pretty much most of the other lenses you're interested in are supported. The port has a little lock button, and all you do is you twist it off. I recommend using a strap wrench and twisting it off with the strap wrench, because the ports can stay on fairly tight, which means it's not going to come off underwater. It's very clearly labeled when the port is locked or unlocked. This is the port for the Sony 16-50mm kit lens. It's a small port, it has threads, and one of the things that I really like about the Sony A63, 64, 6500 cameras and this and other housings is that it works well with both wet macro and wide angle lenses. So you can put a lens on here like the Fantasea UWL09 or the Nauticam wide angle, and you can shoot macro and wide angle on the same dive when using the 16-50mm kit lens. And you can also put a macro lens on, and Fantasea has a nice bayonet system that will allow you to bayonet the wide angle and macro lenses on and off, and then keep those lenses on an arm. If you get a tray and a handle for your strobe or video lights, you can put those lenses on an arm. So that's a really key feature of this housing, I think, is the bayonet system. Like I said, I do recommend getting strobes or video light, and if you have strobes, there's 3 ways to trigger or fire the strobe. You can use a electronic sync cord through the M16 bulkhead. You can use fiber optics and just pop up the internal flash and plug in your fiber optic cables. And you can also use fiber optics, and you can get the optional Fantasea flash trigger, which means you can fire much faster. You don't have to use the internal flash. And that's the preferred method. You just need to keep in mind that that flash trigger is sort of a tight fit, you know, with little wires. So you just need to be very careful when positioning the flash trigger in there, that everything fits, that you close the housing properly, that you don't break anything, because these little pieces of electronics can be delicate at times. But with the vacuum system and the flash trigger and the M16 bulkhead, Fantasea is really stepping up their game with their housings, and we're starting to take notice about all these features, and also the bayonet system. Let's talk about the vacuum system. So if you want to use the Fantasea vacuum system, it's actually really simple. So you open up your housing and you turn it on. There's a tiny little switch here, and the nice thing is it has a little battery that is rechargeable. So after you've used it for a few days, you can just plug in. It's a Android or, you know, camera style interface. You can just recharge it with your laptop or with on the wall, and you don't have to worry about running out of batteries for your vacuum system. It's blinking blue, and then you're going to put in your camera. You're going to close the housing. You're going to unscrew the valve. You're going to take, I love this little pump. It's great. Goes on, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Just going to pump it. It doesn't take long. And you can see it's blinking orange, yellowish orange. Now, what happens is after 4 or 5 minutes, the circuitry in the housing has decided that no air is leaking in, the vacuum is stable, and it'll turn green. So once it's green, you're good to go. You can dive with it. And if it changes a color other than green, that means you want to, you know, there may be some water coming in and you obviously want to abort the dive. But the seal the vacuum system is very easy to use. I really like it. Just before I shot this video, I tried it and it did turn green after a few minutes. We're not going to do that, but what I am going to do is you just twist this, and what I did is I let air in the housing, and now it's back to red, and now you're able to open up the housing again and take out your camera. So overall, a big thumbs up for this new housing from Fantasea. Lightweight, lots of great extras, some included like the vacuum system and some available at additional charge. And even the price of this housing is really nice. It's around $775, but there's a kit that Bluewater Photo sells that's $999, and that includes this port. And for free, we include the zoom gear with the 16 to 50 millimeter lens. For $999, you're getting a really great deal. And with that and the camera, you can dive into the water and start getting great photos. So if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to contact myself or the great staff at Bluewater Photo and Travel at bluewaterphotostore.com, sales at bluewaterphotostore.com, or give us a call. And we look forward to hearing from you, and let us know if you enjoyed the video. Thanks.